For many of us, I'm sure it's been a while since we've taken a test. I see a lot of students in here, and they probably just took a test last week. But there was one test I took in my seminary years, which was just kind of, I took a test for Johannine literature, which is just basically the study of the Gospel of John, the letters of John, and Revelation. And we had this midterm, and I just remember feeling super confident entering into it. I studied the study guide. I'd been attentive to class. I took pretty good notes, and so I just felt very confident going into the test. And as I took it, I also felt very confident, felt like I answered all the questions very well. And then I got the test back, and I got a horrible grade. And I won't tell you what it is, but it was probably the worst grade I've ever gotten. And I was just floored. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was just utterly shocked that I had done so bad. And so, I guess what I did with that knowledge, that shock, I blamed the test. I blamed my teacher. It was definitely the way, the questions were worded, and it was just my teacher. He asked the wrong questions. It wasn't my own fault. In the first reading today, we have Abraham, and we see him being tested by the Lord. And what's the test? The Lord asks him to sacrifice his son Isaac, and this is the test. And what are the results? He's obedient to the Father, and he passes the test. He was willing to sacrifice his son. But I think the question we have more often, or the one that we feel is more unanswered, is why does God test Abraham? Why is there this test? Why is he testing his loyalty, his faith, his faithfulness? And I think one response, problematic, although I think one that some people really have, is they kind of see God as this kind of scientist who is just running his experiments on his people to kind of figure things out about them, just as any scientist might run a rat through tests to figure out how they will respond. But this is an inaccurate understanding of God because, as we know, God is all-knowing, he is all-powerful, and so he doesn't need to test us to find out our hearts. He actually knows our hearts already, and he knows the future, so this is not a good explanation of why God runs tests. And so why, then, this test for Abraham? And the answer is, it's not God, but Abraham who has to learn who Abraham is and also who God is. I'll repeat that. It's not God, but Abraham who has to learn who Abraham is and also who God is. What did Abraham learn about himself from this test? Well, he learned that he was virtuous, that he was faithful, that he trusted in the Lord, that he loves God above all things, even his own son. He passed the test. He feels, his faithfulness. That was the result. He learned something about himself, that he actually, when push came to shove, he was ready to do what God commanded him, even if it meant the sacrifice of his own son. And so we might not be tested to sacrifice our own son or daughter, but the reality of the matter is that we daily run into tests and temptations, and I think for the most part, we don't like temptations, do we, right? We don't like temptations. We don't like tests. Wrong. It's not so much tests that we despise. Tests in themselves are more neutral. What we don't like is being tested and failing. If I had aced that Johannine midterm exam, I would have been elated, and I wouldn't have minded the test at all. I'm sure the Kansas City Chiefs, didn't mind being tested in the Super Bowl because it proved them the victor. It proved them the best team in the NFL. I'm sure if you had a performance review and you did really well in it and got a pay increase, you wouldn't mind that test. In fact, you would welcome such a test. We don't like failure. We don't like knowing that perhaps we're not as strong as we think, that we're not as resistant as we think, that we have all the knowledge that we think. And I think that's why Lent can often be so difficult for us, because not only are we tested in a more kind of thorough way in those fasts we take on and some of those promises we also take on, the reality is Lent can be very difficult and hard because sometimes it helps bring us to that truth that I can't even give up chocolate for 40 days, let alone, be willing to sacrifice my son, my daughter, my time, my money. But we shouldn't be afraid of failure. We shouldn't be afraid because failure is nothing more than just kind of bumping heads with an unpleasant truth. And the more important thing is what we do with that truth when we come to it. When we come to that truth that perhaps we're weaker than we thought, that we're not as strong as we thought, that things are not as ordered in our lives as they should be, that I don't love God as much as I should. Our first response is to do what I did when I took my JOE-9 test and failed. Blame everyone else. It was the teacher's fault. It was the way the questions were worded. It has nothing to do with me. And the second way is to take the higher road by lowering oneself and humbly admitting, you know what? It was my fault. I'm weak. Jesus, I need your help. And Jesus could work with this latter way. Because every week we're going to run into failure against temptation, and every single Mass we have the opportunity to say, I'm sorry. I messed up. I failed. And that opportunity happens at every Mass at the very beginning, at the Confiteor, when we say, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. That time is the opportunity just to say, Lord, I'm sorry. I've fallen short of your law of love. Please help me. And the Lord can work with that. He can work with our weakness. He took on our weakness for love of us. And so, again, Abraham learned something about himself, that he was virtuous, and sometimes through temptations we learn our own weakness. But what did Abraham learn about God when he was tested? He learned not only that does God not want human sacrifice, but that he's the one who will provide the sacrifice. That is what is foreshadowed by the ram caught in the thicket. He provides that ram just as he provided his son as the paschal lamb in order to pay the debt of sin. And every single Sunday, we have the opportunity to share in that sacrifice, to pull the graces we need to cover that weakness that we have in us. And I just want to share one thing with you, too, is that today I'm actually using my chalice. I don't often use it because I'm afraid of it getting, dinged or dropped, and so I'm overprotective of it. But I'm using it today because on the bottom I have an inscription written on it from Corinthians that says, your grace is sufficient because your power is made manifest in weakness. And I have that inscription on the bottom because it's a reminder that, I'm weak, I'm going to fail. I can't do this alone, and Lord, I need you. It is not through my strength that you're going to bring people to you, but it's through my own weakness. It is through your grace. It is through the sacrifice that you are going to bring your people to saintliness, to virtue, to draw them closer to yourself. And it's a beautiful reminder that every Mass, it's okay to admit that times we fail, that we messed up on our Lenten penance, that it's been hard being a parent, and sometimes I caved in and, did things wrong, and that's okay. God can work with that as long as we're humbly ready to come to him and say, Lord, I'm sorry, I need your help. And that opportunity is provided at every single Mass. We have a God who loves us so much, and he loves us so much that if he's willing to give us everything, if he's willing to sacrifice his own son, who could possibly stand against us?